views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
All right, coming up on this edition of Today's Verdict, when members of ICE raid your home or place of employment, you may not know what options you have. Because you asked for this topic, we have a well-known immigration attorney on set to help give you all you need to know when an agent knocks on or knocks down the door. Cannabis, it's the new rage. Well, not so new, but it's legal. Well, almost legal. It's a little confusing. That is why we are making it the focus of the second half of our show. So before you light one up or choose some edibles, stay tuned, because today's verdict starts right now. All right, hello and welcome to Today's Verdict, the live and interactive show that gives you your legal rights and options. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. Well, Today's Verdict is always encouraging you to stay connected. Make sure to tweet us at Today's Verdict and hashtag Ask Today's Verdict if you have a question. Also, make sure to like us and follow us on Facebook at Today's Verdict and check us out at bronxnet.tv. Well, with a rise in ICE raids in the past year, many residents in our city are living with anxiety and constant fear. But no matter your legal status, you have rights at home, work, and even at checkpoints. Well, here to tell us more is attorney Lamari Costa. Lamari, thanks for coming.
You're welcome.
All right, let's talk about that knock on the door, or breaking down the door. Have you heard more of this? Has this been happening in our community?
Yes, absolutely. There has been an increase all over the nation and in the Bronx of ICE coming and knocking in the door.
Does it seem to be something that's just politically that's been happening? Is something ramping up law enforcement? Is there a reason why people are really worried and usually have to stay in their homes?
So there's absolutely been an increase in enforcement with this administration. So as part of that, enforcement is going to people's houses to not necessarily ask if our undocumented immigrants live there, but to look for certain people that maybe have previous orders of deportation, didn't show up to court. So they are looking for specific people.
But if I remember correctly, your home is a safe place. In other words, if there is a knock on the door and it is somebody from ICE, you do not have to let them in. Am I correct?
Correct. Everybody has constitutional rights in this country. So if ICE comes knocking at your door, you have the right to not open the door. They have to have a warrant signed by a judge for a search warrant for them to actually go inside the house. And usually ICE does not have that.
Okay, so let's start from the point where somebody, is out on the street, or someone who's not necessarily, protected by the four corners of their own walls of their house. How does it work? Does somebody stop you on the street? Do they have the right to just, ask you some questions, to see a driver's license? Tell me, in terms of your experience in immigration, what usually happens with your clients?
Well, they can ask you. But the person has the right to refuse to answer and remain silent. Nobody has to answer where they're from, how long you've been here, were you born here, when did you come into this country. You don't have to answer that question.
Now, if it's in connection with any type of other crime that may have been committed, let's say it's anything from littering to, drinking alcohol on the street, and somebody really comes over to you and they ask you to stop that may be a crime, you shouldn't be, drinking or whatever. By the way, are you legal? Can they ask these types of questions?
No.
They cannot?
No, they can't, but you have the right to answer correctly.
Okay.
And the same with documents, I'm sorry. You don't have to show a document, an ID. Like if your only identification is a passport, you don't have to show a passport that's going to show where you're from. All
right, let's move a little bit into the employment field, because I think that's where most of the viewers have been asking questions. What happens at work? Where do they Where does the line cross in terms of where an employer has to tell somebody that I may not be legal? What rights do you have as an undocumented immigrant at your place of business?
Well, ICE also rates places of employment, right? So of work. So if ICE comes, they have the same. You have the same rights also of remaining silent. And obviously, if they're looking for a specific person, they can arrest you. If you cannot, if the employer cannot produce documents that the person is working legally there, they can also arrest them.
So let's say somebody knocks on the door of my law office and they're looking for somebody who they think might not be legal. I can refuse to let them in, is that correct? In other words, let's say somebody knocks on the door, they think I have an employee who's undocumented. It's the same thing as a home, it's just my office. I don't have to let them in, am I correct?
Well, it's a little different because they can, if you are actually employing somebody, they're also going after you as an employer.
All right, so what do I have to worry about as an employer?
Okay, so it's very important that employers have their I-9 forms, which is the verification of that your employee can work in the United States legally. That is the major process that employers have to go through to enforce, to make sure that their employees are working here legally.
But what if the employee has given you a false Social Security number, you didn't know it was false Social Security number, have given you false information? What is your responsibility as an employer? How would you even know that you might be, you might be employing somebody who's not legal? You may not necessarily know it. What could you do to protect yourself?
There are ways that you can use E-Verify through the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Service website, where you can check if the documents are legal.
And are you expected to do that as an employer? Is that something that...
So that's tricky, not in every state.
All right. Let's get into the deportation situation. Unfortunately, I guess somehow you're picked up, you're arrested, they come and see you. What's the next thing that you do if you think somebody may end up in a deportation proceeding?
So again, people should remain silent. They should not sign things, especially if they don't speak or read English, because sometimes, unfortunately, they might not understand what they have in front of them, and they might be giving away rights, like to see a judge.
No, so when do you get the call generally? Are they in ICE custody? Are they someplace else? Or is the knocking on the door when you get the call? When do you usually get a call that there seems to be a problem?
When they are already in the detention facility.
Center? So what do you do there? So do you, did they let you in to interview the particular person? Is your interview recorded? Tell me how it works.
No, it's an attorney visit. So you go. It could be an ICE facility, or it could be a regular facility that it's contracted by ICE. So I go and visit them, and you can have a regular visit. Now, having said that, there has been reports that in the border with Mexico, sometimes now they're not allowing attorneys to actually go and meet person. You can do it by phone.
By phone. Well, at least
but
you
we are here in the East Coast now. That's
right.
not happening.
So in terms of, have you participated in these hearings where you've had to produce witnesses or different people? What seems to be the strongest evidence that you have to prevent a deportation?
Well, it depends on the case. There's different release from removal. There's asylum, which you hear a lot about these days, and there's other releases like cancellation of removal, where you have to prove hardship. So usually the spouse talking for the children and telling them how they're going to suffer when the person is going to be deported.
Does it seem to land on sympathetic ears, or do most judges just look at it and say, look, you're not here legally, time to go on the plane, and we send you back? What seems to be your experience?
There is some of this relief. There's discretionary parts to it, but I think if you have a strong evidence and if you have a good case, I think they're decided favorably.
By the way, so we talked a little bit about your rights in your home, and we talked, I think, a little bit in terms of your rights as an employer in the business. What about checkpoints? You end up at, it could be a checkpoint at a stoplight. It could be any place. What are your rights there? Do you have to answer? Do you have to give that information?
No, you don't have to tell anybody where are you from.
So they knock on your window. They tell you you've been speeding. Now, it might not necessarily be a checkpoint, but they tell you you've been speeding. They pull out the radar gun. They tell you 15 miles over, we're going to give you a ticket. Can they then ask you?
No.
They still can't.
Now there is exceptions when you are close to the border. I believe it's 100 miles. Things there work a little different because there is a presumption that there are more undocumented immigrants that just cross the border illegally. So they can go a little further, but that's not the case here in the Bronx. Also at the airports, that's another place where they can, because it's the border. Yes.
Right. All right. Some tips. Somebody's watching today and they think that the heat is on and they may be picked up fairly soon. What would you tell them to make sure that they protect themselves? Other than seeing you, hopefully they wouldn't have to, but what would you tell them, a viewer who's watching right now who thinks that they could be picked up?
Again, it's being said over and over, but know that you have a right to remain silent.
All right. And this is a tough question for you because I don't know, if you have any political views on it, but where do you think we're heading? Let's start with just New York itself. Do we look like we're giving a little bit more protection to the individuals who are either wandering the streets, who are not legal, or cleaning people's homes are not legal? Do we seem like we're giving a little bit more compassion, or are we turning into more of a society that is looking to pick people up?
No, absolutely. I think we are almost like a sanctuary state, and I know that was one of the things in the election yesterday. We are very compassionate compared to other states. I do practice all over the United States, and it's very different, the enforcement actions here in the city, in the 5 boroughs. I'm not talking about Long Island.
And not upstate.
Exactly.
But here in the 5 boroughs, there seems to be
yes.
a little more leniency.
Yes, and there's rules and laws in place where there's limitations on how much information can law enforcement give to ICE. And the New York City ID, which is in part created for people that don't have.
And most importantly, where do we find you?
So my office is here in the Bronx, and you can call us at 718-798-0188.
Well, this is one of the hot topics we actually have on the show. We expect you to come back and give us some more updates, okay?
Absolutely.
All right, Lamari, it's been a pleasure. We have to take a quick break, but don't worry, we'll be back more Today's Verdict right after this.
For all the papas out there, let's stop what we're doing and take a moment. A moment to be with our kids. They can be loud moments, goofy moments, sporty moments, dorky moments, kooky moments. Moments where we talk or walk or just hang out. It doesn't really matter. They all count because every time dads take a moment to be with their kids, well, it's pretty momentous. So let's all take a moment to make a moment today.
How can I help my daughter with her reading?
Searching for help with Dachshund reading.
No.
Let me try. Sarah's bright, but when she's reading, she has trouble sounding out words.
Playing world music.
What?
I give up.
Wait, I was trying to show you how Sarah feels every day. Frustrating, isn't it? Redirecting to understood.org.
Join parents and experts at understood.org, a free online resource about learning and attention issues to help your child thrive.
All right, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host, David Lesch. We are always encouraging you to stay connected. Tweet us at today's verdict. Well, cannabis and its foray into the legitimate parts of society can be difficult to untangle, but don't worry, we're here to help navigate the new legal area known as cannabis law. Here to talk to us on the hot topic are attorneys David Holland, Andrew Shriver, and James Landau. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. This topic fascinates me, but I have to tell you, David, I really don't understand it. There's so many different nuances. I don't know what's legal, what's not legal. I don't know what is considered to be medical. I don't really know what the difference between criminalization. So start us out and please enlighten me.
Absolutely, you're not alone. It's very complicated and it's very confusing, but in 1970, the federal government made it illegal, calling it a Schedule I drug, saying that it didn't have any medical validity and that it couldn't be tested. Despite that, since 1996, 33 states have actually said, despite the federal law, that there is medical validity to it, and they passed what are called medical legalization programs. New York has the Compassionate Care Act. In addition to that, 11 states have actually passed adult recreational use, is what they call it, or adult use, and New York is on the eve of doing that. And so under the medical program in New York, a patient who's certified by a doctor can go to a dispensary and obtain cannabis oil and edibles and so forth, but they can't get raw flower, which they can smoke. But New York just recently passed decriminalization, where you can carry up to 2 ounces almost of the flower, and you can actually smoke it, and that would only as a regular joint, and that would be just a monetary fine of $50.
All right, so let's, all right, David, I'll tell you what, David, let's take us into somebody's apartment. I think we talked about this a little bit earlier.
Sure.
Somebody is smoking marijuana on the couch. Fair or foul?
Well, within your own home.
Not a problem.
Basically not a problem
Legal.
because possession of under 2 ounces, assuming that scenario, is really not an issue
All right,
anymore.
now they're smoking on the couch, but they have a certain amount of possession that's sitting next to them on the couch. Which part is fair, which part is foul? I assume the smoking's okay, but the possession's not okay.
Well, once you cross that threshold, the protections that came with decriminalization back this past June, I think fall by the wayside.
Right.
You've then exceeded the limit, and at that point, you've opened yourself up to the criminal justice system.
Fine, now let's take us out into the street, right? Somebody is smoking a marijuana joint on the street. Yes, no? Because nobody knows anymore. We smell it, we see it. This legal or not legal in New York?
Actually,
Please.
in New York right now, it is technically legal as long as it's you're smoking a joint or oil. You can be up to 2 ounces. You can be smoking that openly now, whereas it used to be a misdemeanor. Now it's a fine.
All right, fine so far. Now, what if you got in your pocket a certain amount of marijuana that you're not smoking? That okay or not okay?
Under 2 ounces, you're still okay. Again, you're not completely off the hook because you can get a violation, but violations, for those of you who've walked your dog without a leash, it's basically the same experience. You'll get a ticket, you get a fine, but in terms of a criminal record, you won't have one for that.
All right, James, last man standing. So, edibles, explain this to me. Is this legal? Is it not legal? Can I chew it anywhere I want? Can I drive and chew it? Please explain to me a little bit about edibles.
Right, well, as far as I understand, and you guys will correct me if I'm wrong, edibles are not legal in New York.
Not legal.
Period.
All right.
Well, with the exception of medical.
Right.
Okay, but just recreational edibles, you can't chew it in New York, correct?
And we're talking, you have to identify what we're talking about also. There's THC, there's CBD, there's hemp,
I haven't even
marijuana.
gotten into the oils. I'm just talking
Right.
about
Well,
what you're ingesting at this point.
But you can't even, in New York City, for example, really, and in New York, you can't ingest an edible or something to drink, a food or drink that's infused with CBD, for example, that's even from hemp.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the CBD oil, if you can. David, does it matter whether you buy it in New York, buy it outside of New York? Can you use oil here? Can you, I don't know, use it for any purpose that you want? Explain to me how this works.
Sure. As of right now in New York, cannabidiol, CBD, as long as under 0.3% of THC, is perfectly legal within the state, and anyone can consume it and possess it. And there's no set limits yet as to how much a person can possess or sell and so forth.
All right.
If it's under that threshold,
Yeah,
it's
then
not
what?
considered marijuana.
Okay. All right, David, employers and employees, this is something some of the viewers would like to know. Can you be drug tested as an, for marijuana? And what if it comes up that you have smoked marijuana? Can you be fired? Unless this isn't your bag, who's supposed to be answering this question?
So this one, I think this one's you, Jim, right?
So the answer is yes, you can be tested, and the answer of whether you can be fired, whether it's wrongfully terminated or not, really depends on the jurisdiction. The cases are all over the place. The cases are coming up in terms of people who are ingesting medical marijuana for what, they have a card, they're operating pursuant to the state program, so they're consistent with state law, and they go and they get drug tested and they say, hey, I'm going to fail, and the employer says, well, we've got to test you anyway, and then they get fired. And so then the question is what happens next? And in some cases, the employee wins, and in some cases, the employer wins.
I also want to know what are the responsibilities of the employer if they find out they have an employee who seems to be testing positive? I guess for any drug, really, in some respects, but marijuana specifically. Do they have to report the person to the authorities? Does this ever come up?
I don't think that that's an issue. I mean, it's essentially, you'd really have to distinguish between private and public employment. For private employment, employers generally speaking can set their own rules. In the same way, some might say that if it would seem strange for an employer to test to see if somebody had alcohol, at this point, if a private employer wanted to test to see if somebody had marijuana, if they turned out positive, particularly with decriminalization in effect, there'd be no crime to report.
Right.
But it does depend on the sensibility of the employer, and I think as the facts continue to evolve about about how the drug has kind of been stigmatized, and there's a lot that's just false that's out there, I think the concerns that employers have are going to start to fade away.
Well, so here's the thing. In this particular area of law, it's very difficult to find areas that have never been touched. We had somebody on set, I was telling you, talking about drones and drone law. We hadn't have drones 15 years ago, so it's a whole new set of laws. No one really knows what's going on here or where it's going. Does it look like the federal government seems to be, or federal case law seems to be solidifying at this point? Are the states ahead of the federal government? Where's it?
Well, the states are certainly ahead of the federal government in the sense that they're taking initiatives to pass legalization programs either for medical use or adult use. New York City has actually taken a very advanced stance saying that no longer should people be tested for marijuana when they're actually in the job application process. So, and furthermore, New York City has asked that people not be terminated just because of marijuana use. It has to somehow be impairing their ability on the job. So the states have taken a very progressive view as compared to the federal government.
Because David, you and I had mentioned, we talked about this earlier. What if, it's as if I go from state Supreme Court to federal court next door. I'm walking with, in one pocket I have some marijuana, which is a small amount of possession. Yeah. I seem to be fine at 67th Street. Moving to the federal courthouse, all of a sudden I could be arrested.
Yeah.
So where's the give?
So very quickly on that, the issue really comes back to what Dave identified a little while ago, is the fact that it still remains a controlled substance, Class 1 controlled substance, which means under federal law, it's a drug that's considered to have no medical use whatsoever. We can spend days on why that premise was not quite right from the beginning. Exactly. But so the real tension is that states essentially took it on their own to say, well, this just doesn't work, and we're going to turn this black market into a legal market. And the federal government has essentially adopted a stance that says, unless you're interfering with certain priorities, like keep it out of the hands of minors, keep guns and cartels away from it, keep it out of interstate commerce, et cetera, the federal government has essentially, it's ping-ponged a bit, but generally speaking, the stance that they've continued to take is we're going to leave you alone. Now, if you should walk in to where you're getting searched with a metal detector in the federal courthouse, then you're pretty much begging for intervention.
Or an airport.
Right. Well, in airports, actually, just one example.
Port Authority?
No, this is true. In Los Angeles, you'd think that you couldn't walk in and take it through the airport, but that actually, they've actually informed the federal agencies that they're not going to stop people for that.
They're not.
Because it's not within federal control, the people who are actually working at the airport. So that also depends on the state, but they can set their own rules on that unless it's specifically federal jurisdiction.
James, let's talk a little bit about some of the clients that you represent. Tell me where you get involved usually.
Well, I get involved often in the regulatory side. We also, people have questions about what they can do and can't do.
People or employers?
Well,
or both?
really, mostly the businesses. I represent businesses predominantly. We have a corporate practice, and businesses have questions about entity formation, an LLC versus an Inc. What kinds of agreements do we need to have with a distributor or with somebody who's investing money in us.
Which leads me to, I mean, off the cuff here, but I'm a big South Park fan, and been watching this entire season on Integrity Farms and the marijuana farm. It's all the way out west, obviously. It's not New York. But tell me, what's going on in New York? Can you grow marijuana upstate? Can you sell it someplace else? How does it work?
Well, outside the medical program, nobody's allowed to lawfully grow it.
You
but
can't.
That will change. But the hemp program, the industrial hemp program, has come into New York, and that's a robust and growing area from which cannabidiol, the CBD we were talking about, comes from.
All right, tips, gentlemen. Someone's watching today, they want to get into the business. Is it fair to say New York's a good place to kind of put your foot in the market, or should you be heading out to California? I mean, what do you think?
So the prediction is that New York will probably be a major center for this business, and there are already evolving businesses that are just waiting for the adult use program to come online that are essentially just ready to seize on that and develop what is essentially a very robust black market and convert it into that legal market. So the best thing to do if you're planning, if you'd like to get into the space, is to start planning now, because we really are on the precipice of legalization, and there's going to be a race for those who want to get licensed by the state for this. So you really want to make sure that you start getting your ducks in a row now.
And on that note, this is a fascinating topic. I expect the three of you guys to come back maybe in the next couple of months to enlighten us. I know you have a CLE come up in the Bronx. We're going to make sure that that information's on the screen. And again, thanks for coming.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course you, the viewers, for watching. If you missed any part of today's show, be sure to check it out at www.bronxnet.tv. Also remember, if there's a legal issue or topic you'd like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to contact me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org or tweet us at Today's Verdict, and make sure to hashtag #AskToday'sVerdict. From myself and all of us at the studio, always remember, know your rights, know your issues, reach a verdict. We'll see you next time. I love this stuff. I mean, it's just, I think it's